Could you, if you can, could you move toward the front of the room? It's a big room, and it'll be a lot easier for you to hear if you're toward the front, though Dr. Greenberg is going to use a microphone, right? Okay, that's a condition for speaking in this room. You have to use a mic. It's pretty cavernous. Anyway, this is a session focused on the drug BYM-338. Dr. Greenberg is going to talk about where things are with the clinical trial and the other considerations related to it. I know everybody has a lot of interest. By the way, if you don't know this already, and I hope it doesn't matter to anybody since they're only going to see the back of your heads, this is one of the sessions that's being webcast over the internet by TMA. So if you're facing this way, no one's going to be able to see you. Anyway, here's Dr. Greenberg.
Okay, thank you, Bob. Hello, my name's Steve Greenberg. Everybody hear me okay? Okay. Thanks for coming out for this session. I did give a similar session this morning, which I'll basically repeat here, so you don't need to be at both, but you're certainly welcome to be here. I think I'll start with a brief introduction to this program, this drug program, and I'll take questions along the way and certainly after the brief introduction as well. So I'm going to talk about a drug therapeutic candidate called BYM-338. It's also known as bimagrumab. And this is, I know the program refers to this as a breakthrough therapy. It's not a therapy at this time. It's a experimental drug, experimental molecule technically, that's being developed and has potential to be a treatment for IBM, but it may also never make it as a treatment. It may turn out not to work. And so it's not a therapy at the moment. It's just an investigational drug. It has received a special designation from the Food and Drug Administration called Breakthrough Therapy Designation, and that's where the term comes from, and I'll discuss that a little bit in a little while. So this is a molecule that combats muscle atrophy. And I've been studying IBM for about a decade now and trying to understand the mechanism of disease. I've been impressed with how much muscle atrophy occurs in this disease. And in my laboratory, through the study of muscle biopsy material from patients like you, maybe even some people in this room participated in those studies, I analyzed muscle tissue and discovered that a certain pathway was active in IBM muscle, an atrophy pathway. And this is the pathway that this drug targets. And so this led to a rationale and then eventually the approach that has been taken here with Novartis, a company that has a molecule that affects this atrophy pathway. And Novartis put together a small clinical trial of 14 patients to receive a single dose of the drug. And so we conducted that study. The patients were dosed about 2 years ago right now, and patients received a single dose of this investigational drug intravenously. And we looked at a variety of measurements, but in particular, we were looking at the size of muscles. The size of muscle before being given the drug candidate, and then 8 weeks afterwards, 2 months later. And this was done through MRI scan and other technologies. And the study results have not been published yet, so I can't fully discuss them, but the results were positive in a certain way and did demonstrate that people with IBM, when given this drug, can enlarge muscles that were affected by the disease, particularly the quadricep muscle, which is one of the main ones that were looked at. This was a placebo-controlled study, so some patients got drug, some patients got placebo, which is just a sugar and salt infusion, and nobody knew who got what, and so the data was analyzed after it was all available, And we did see that the patients who got this drug did enlarge their muscles to a greater extent than patients who got placebo. There's a lot of data in this trial, and it will come out. It will get published eventually. That's in process right now. But in the meantime, the results have stimulated further development of this drug candidate therapeutic. The drug had been being developed and continued to being developed by Novartis for many other muscle conditions, but Novartis was very attracted to the idea of coming into a rare condition like IBM with this drug based on the data I had generated. And so now we're at a point where the next step is a much larger trial. This first one was only 14 people, and it was a single dose of the drug. We're now moving into a 240-person trial with repeated dosing, with dosing of this drug every 4 weeks for almost a year, for 48 weeks. Here. That trial is being managed by Novartis. I'm not in charge of that trial. I don't have any control over it. I don't even have a lot of knowledge of the details of what's going on with certain aspects of that trial. But I do know that it's a large one, that it's 240 people. It's going to be probably be conducted in at least 13 different countries. So it's a very international trial, which means that each individual site will probably only have a relatively small number of patients, rather than a handful of sites that have 30 or 40 or 50 patients each. It's more likely that there'll be dozens of sites in 13 different countries, and each site will have just a handful of patients enrolled. Yeah, the question is whether there's a Canadian site, and I don't know. I've never seen a list of all the sites that have been approached even, and just because sites are approached as potential sites doesn't guarantee that the site makes it through contracting and IRB approval and all of the other regulatory issues that need to get done. Novartis does have a website where they list some of the planned sites, but I don't think all of them there, and I'd encourage you shouldn't have any trouble finding that on the internet, just looking for Novartis BYM338, so at clinicaltrials.gov. So I'll come right back to questions because I think I'm almost done with my introductory remarks. So this study has already started. There are 2 sites in the US that are listed on the internet as already enrolling patients in it. The estimated time to completion of the study is 2 years. November of 2015 is what is posted right now. It all depends on the speed of enrollment. It's a 1-year follow-up study, so after the very last patient is enrolled, that patient needs to be followed and treated for 1 year. So if enrollment goes very quickly and everybody's enrolled within 6 months from now, then it'll only be 1 year after that before all the data has been collected and can be analyzed. It's certainly my hope that this works. It may or may not work. Ultimately, what we're looking for in this next trial is not whether it increases the size of muscles, but whether it increases your function, your ability to do things. And there's a variety of measures that will be looked at. The most important one is a walking time, how far you can walk in a certain period of time. And that's the main outcome measure of this trial, is to see whether it improves walking function. But again, other functions will be looked at. And depending on what that shows, the breakthrough therapy designation, which has been which has been granted by the Food and Drug Administration, makes drug development potentially much faster than it would otherwise. The designation allows the program to move forward with much more guidance with the FDA, back and forth discussions over the best way to approach the study that might result in a favorable decision by the FDA once all the data is back. It also provides certain accelerated status for the program so that it's possible that if this next trial is positive and it has data showing efficacy, that the FDA might consider granting approval to the drug at that point, and then it would be available on the market for everybody to use. So it's my hope, it would be my hope that everybody who wants to can be in this trial, but that's not going to be the case. My hope is that everybody in this room who wants to be on the trial will be able to get this drug because we have a successful trial within a year and a half or 2 years from now, and then the drug is available to anybody who wants it and whose physician agrees that it's the right approach. So I'm cautiously optimistic about it. I do understand that most drugs don't make it. This one is promising right now, and if it works, we'll find out, and then it would become available. Yes, I'll take more questions now. Yeah, the question is whether the trial would involve newly diagnosed or long-term patients, and it doesn't matter for this. Yeah, the next question is, what are the exclusions? There's a very long list of inclusion and exclusion criteria for this trial, and that would be determined. It's really the task of if you're at a site and you're being considered for enrollment, for the physician at that site to go over that all with you. If there are there are some big ones, and I'll just throw those out there. And the big ones are, you have to be able to walk at least 3 meters in 6 minutes. So 3 meters is 10 feet. You can have somebody help you stand up, so you don't have to be able to get out of a chair by yourself. And you can use any assist device for walking, a wheeled cart with brakes, crutches, anything that you want, but then you do have to be able to move 10 feet within 6 minutes. So that's one main inclusion criteria. You have to have a diagnosis of inclusion body myositis as specifically defined by the company, by Novartis in this. It's not necessarily the same diagnosis, same criteria that your physician may have used to diagnose you with inclusion body myositis. So there are some differences there. And probably the biggest exclusion criteria has to do with the use of other drugs that might interfere with the interpretation of the study results, particularly immunosuppressive drugs like corticosteroids or methotrexate or IVIG. There are very specific statements in the protocol about how long you would need to be off of such drugs, what doses you could be on, and still be considered for the trial. Yes?
So in your initial trial, it was one infusion, and you stated that you think this is going to go on for a full year. Is this like multiple infusions over that full year?
Yeah, the question is about the dosing regimen for the dosing approach for the next one. And there would be one infusion given every 4 weeks for a year.
And does that presuppose then that this, if the drug is approved for use by the people that have IBM, that you would be taking this on a regular basis? It's not like something you would take and then stop. It would have to go on and maintain muscle mass.
It's very hypothetical at this point. We really don't know much about we don't know anything about what this drug did besides for one single infusion in patients with IBM who were ultimately followed for 24 weeks. Actually, it was only 10 patients ended up on drug for a 24-week period of time. So it's very unclear. I mean, most people's guess, my guess from the understanding of the mechanism of this drug, is that you'd probably need to be on it indefinitely to have a benefit, but it's very unclear. It's possible that it might produce some benefit, and we learn that it's good to take people off of it for a while and just let the muscle stay where it is. It's very hard to predict how it might ultimately be used if it was effective. Yes.
Initially, you saw an increase in the muscle in that 4-week period. Is that correct? The muscle grew, but you didn't record any benefit from the patient other than the size of the muscle? I mean, they didn't report any additional functionality. I know you said you be careful about what you say,
Right.
but, I mean, all,
The question is about the first trial results and with one infusion and how that, I did state that that increased the size of the muscle, and the question is about what about function and strength of the muscles. And again, those results haven't been published. I would just say broadly that the primary goal of that study was to see if muscle size was increased. The study was not designed to try and detect changes in muscle and strength and function over a short period of time, although those were looked at and there were trends that looked promising.
identify the size of change, the rate of the change.
The question is what the question was what was the magnitude or size of the change, and over an 8-week period, the size of muscle grew by about 6 or 7%.
We heard two speakers actually last night, patients that were in the trial. And the one especially said she felt much better, but it soon wore off. So that was her assessment of the trial for her.
Right. The comment was that the two patients from last night spoke at this meeting, and they were both involved in the trial, and one shared her experience that she felt it had worked and then had worn off afterwards. Yes?
You're going to be infusing them, the study's going to be infusing for 1 year. How long will a patient be followed to establish either efficacy, toxicity, all the effects of this study before the study is considered to be concluded?
Yeah, the question is, when would this study be concluded after the 48-week period of infusions occurs? And I can't say for certain about that. The company has left it open so that it could be as long as 2 years. They could make a decision to continue to do infusions at that point, even after the 48 weeks, or just follow people in an observational mode afterwards. So I don't know at this point when. There's no timeline that I'm aware of for the study being completely closed. Even after the participants are no longer involved in any capacity, whether receiving infusions or being observed, the study still goes on for typically a year or more, during which data analysis is occurring and other, mostly data analysis. Follow-up, yeah.
In the 14, the tiny study, the 14 people, was there any observance of any kind of allergy, toxicity, anything that would have been a warning flag that this is not perhaps going to be a successfully concluded study?
Yeah, there was nothing that stopped the program, obviously. The main adverse events that were seen in that trial were muscle cramps, which occurred in about half of patients who got drug and in nobody who got placebo. But we're talking about 11 people versus 3 people here. And acne, which occurred, I don't recall the percentage, but in a significantly different percentage in patients who got the drug than the placebo. Yes?
You mentioned that this drug was also showing promise in other diseases, other muscular diseases. Are there going to be any other trials in those other diseases at the same time?
The question is about the development of this drug and its promise in other diseases and potential trials. So I don't think I stated that it showed promise in that, but only that the company is developing and studying the drug in other conditions. I don't know what that data has shown. But it's certainly, my understanding of the company plan, Novartis's plan, was to develop this drug for a wide variety of conditions in which it would be predicted to be helpful. and IBM.
These seniors that lose strength potentially could benefit them as well.
I won't speak to that. The comment is whether it would whether it would help healthy individuals, older healthy individuals or not. So, yes.
Is there going to be an increase in each dose?
The dose for an individual person is fixed, but there are 4 different groups out of the 240 patients, 60 in each group. One group will receive placebo, another will receive sort of low dose, and then a middle dose and a higher dose.
But compared to the last study, is it going to be more?
It's less than that. The last study was a single dose of 30 milligrams per kilogram. The highest dose of the 4 groups in the next study is 10 milligrams per kilogram. So it's a third. Drugs can be dosed either, one can give higher doses less frequently or lower doses more frequently. And so I can't speak to all the decisions that were, all the thinking that went behind dosing this at 10 milligrams per kilogram every 4 weeks, as opposed to something like 30 every 8 weeks or so. Yes.
Say 240. Is that the total all over the U.S. or is that at each site?
Yeah, the question is about the number 240. That's the total over the whole world.
Over the whole world?
Yeah, this is 13 countries, including Australia and Japan and Europe, multiple countries in Europe, the U.S. Yes.
On a TMA email within the last month, there was an update of information about this. And it looked like there were 5 sites that were mentioned, 2 in Boston, 1 in Ohio, Kansas City, and Texas or Phoenix. Is that not correct?
Well, it's certainly not a complete list of sites. I'm not aware of that email. I'm not sure where TMA got that information. I think the only information that I'm aware of that's available out there is on the clinicaltrials.gov website, which Novartis has posted. It's the official listing for all clinical trials. The government has set up a website. It's called clinicaltrials.gov. And on that site, there's a page for this advertising and discussing this study and listing sites that are currently planned. Yes, I'll come right back to you if you don't mind. I know he's been, yes.
I was directed by my urologist on Portland, Oregon. I have a pacemaker, and I noticed you can't have an MRI. Does that take me out of this next situation? Are they going to be doing MRIs?
Yeah, I don't know if pacemaker will take you out or not. MRI is not a part of the second study. It was a key part of the first, but not of the second. Yes.
Do you have a better chance of getting accepted into the study if you live in the city where it's being tested?
Yeah, questions about chances of getting to the study if you live in a city which has a site. I don't know, and I don't decide how different sites do this. I can just tell you how it looks to me. And it looks to me that there's an overwhelming number of people who want to be involved in this trial, and that each site is going to have only a relatively handful of people that they enroll. And I would guess that would come from patients that those doctors are already treating and have been treating for many years and are familiar with. We, like many other sites, are maintaining a list of people who call. I don't know if we'll ever end up on that list. We have patients that we've been seeing for many years already. And so I think that's probably what's going to happen, but I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure that any site is going to have more than a handful of patients. Yeah, it's not the willingness of it. It's simply that it's because there's so many sites, and it's in so many countries, It's really not a American study by any means. And I just want to point out, because I know it's a source of frustration and disappointment, perhaps, but we don't know if this works or not. This could turn out to be harmful for patients with IBM. We really don't know, and that's what this study is going to look at. And so there's a trade-off between wanting to be involved in something that you think is going to help you right now, but respecting that it's really an experiment. And I don't know what this drug is going to do. This drug could enlarge the heart, for example. And that's something that's going to be looked at in this trial, is looking at the size of the heart. And that might not be good if that happens. I'd also point out that a quarter of patients in the study are going to be getting placebo. And we're thankful we couldn't bring this drug couldn't be developed unless there were placebo arms, and there are people willing to come into this trial and volunteer for that, but a quarter of the people will get a placebo every week for 48 weeks. And then another quarter are going to get the low dose, the lowest dose of the drug, which maybe would work, maybe it wouldn't. It's not quite because there are 4 different arms to this right now. There's a clearly no-dose arm, but there are other arms which are are lower doses, and they may not work either, even if the highest dose worked. So that's something to consider here. We'd be grateful to have people interested, but I hope people don't feel like they've missed out on something if they don't make it into this trial, because it's very early, and a quarter to maybe a half of people will get no dose or an ineffective dose, even if this thing works. Yes?
We know that the follistatin trial is designed to suppress the body's myostatin to allow the muscle to continue to grow. Does the V1M338 trying to accomplish a similar thing? And secondly, if it's infused, will all muscles in the body be affected and possibly get larger?
Right. So the question is about the relationship of this agent to the follistatin therapy trial and the systemic infusion versus the local injections. The pathway is similar here. There are some subtle differences. This molecule blocks a receptor on muscle to which myostatin binds, while follistatin binds directly to myostatin. Both have the effect of inhibiting the function of myostatin, but it's not at all clear that myostatin is the key stimulator of this pathway. There are other molecules that also bind to this receptor. GDF11 and activin A, are 2 others that are known to bind to this receptor, and those will be blocked by the Novartis drug. And it's not clear to me that follistatin would neutralize those. So there are some subtle differences, but we're roughly talking about the same pathway here. The Novartis trial is an IV infusion. It's given into the veins, and it does go everywhere. And so the prediction is that it would have this effect on all muscle in the body, as opposed to a local injection. And it's a placebo-controlled trial. I believe that the follistatin gene therapy trial does not involve placebo. I can't speak for certain about that, which has certain limitations at this point, because if people do seem to perform better with those injections, it can be difficult to know whether that's a placebo response or not. And I know that's not the primary goal of that trial at this point, is to establish efficacy. It's safety of it and to have some preliminary signal to carry it further into development.
I'm on the clinicaltrials.gov website, and currently there are 7 venues listed.
7 sites.
7 sites listed for the American side.
For the American, there's 5 in Italy, and there's a whole bunch of others, so, yeah. Okay, yes?
So what was the drug originally used for?
Yeah,
How does the dose differ from what they...
right. The drug's not used for anything right now. It's not an approved drug for any indication at all. No, it's not approved for anything. It's still being studied for potential approval for a number of different conditions. So they all involve muscle atrophy. So for example, the muscle atrophy that occurs with cancer, called cachexia, or muscle atrophy that occurs from immobility. If you have a hip fracture and are in bed for 6 weeks, you lose a lot of muscle. So I think those are the types of things that the company Novartis has been exploring this candidate therapeutic for and had already been doing for a while before the potential for trying this in IBM came along. Yes? Yeah, the question is if one was involved in the trial and the trial was working astonishingly and one was in the placebo group, whether one might be switched to active drug. That would always be a company decision that could be made with discussion with FDA. I would doubt that would occur. I would think that they're going to bring this through 48 weeks regardless, but it's certainly the case if there were astonishingly great benefits seen at an earlier time period that the study might be terminated early. Most of the time when studies are terminated early, it's because it's failing, or there's it's decided that there's no chance of it succeeding, and then they get terminated early. So it'd be unusual to stop one early because it was looking good. But it would likely be the case that after the study, that patients would be rolled over into open label, which means that they would, all the placebo patients, everybody would get a dose, whichever dose looked most favorable. I can't speak for that study, but that's a common practice in drug development, is to bring people through a randomized trial and then to gain some experience during which everybody's getting drug at a dose that is thought to be appropriate. And so it is common for people to get rolled over to these open label phases. Yes.
Would participants be notified whether they had received the placebo or the active drug? Or would that be information which would be available to their clinician or to themselves?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know if they would be ever notified of that. My guess would be they probably wouldn't be. Yes. Yeah, the question is about exclusions, and I don't recall that specifically in the protocol. It certainly was an exclusion in the first trial, and I'm pretty sure it would be one. So anybody who's immunocompromised would likely be excluded from the trial. Yeah. That's a great question. I mean, I've expected the question is when are the results going to be published from the first trial? When's my expectation about that? And I guess I don't know. I've had things I've expected to be published in 3 months that took 3 years. I would be shocked if this one took more than a year at this point from now. And I would hope that within 3 to 6 months it would be published. That's not up to me. We can try. It's up to reviewers and editors. Yes.
When you speak of an exclusion of steroids, would that be steroids taken orally, or could that include like a nasal drip for size?
Yeah, it's unlikely that the question is, would nasal steroids exclude people from the next trial? And it's an individual decision, but I don't think that would exclude somebody. Yes?
If it reached a conclusion, at this open label point, if it reached a conclusion that seems to be relatively successful, would it then be available to larger hospitals like the Johns
It would only be rolled out after the FDA approves it. There's no general availability that's made for drugs until FDA approval. All the availability occurs through tightly controlled, protocol-defined clinical trials.
You said that the drug also stops the receptor from receiving two other molecules. Do you see any problems to arise from that? What are those other pathways involved?
Yeah, so one of the molecules has certain hormonal effects. And so that's one of the issues that will be looked at in this longer-term study is whether there are hormonal changes that go on. That probably accounts for some of the acne that we saw in people who 60 and 70 years old who felt like they were teenagers again, but not usually the way they really want, not the teenagehood that they would like to imagine at that age. It was mild, but it was present, and so that's one of the hormonal consequences. Yes?
Would there be qualitative follow-up as well as quantitative?
The question is, will there be qualitative as well as quantitative follow-up? What do you mean? What are you thinking about with qualitative follow-up?
Interviews as regards quality of life, etc.
Yes, there's interviews or quality of life. There's a wide variety of measures that's going to be collected on people participating in this, including questionnaires that are open-ended, as well as precise quantitative measurements. Yes?
You're going to look for this data in the next year or so. Would you look under like PubMed? Are you going to be listed as the principal investigator?
I'm the last author of the manuscript, and so it certainly would come up on PubMed under my name. I would expect when there is a publication that's available that the TMA communications department would email that out. Yeah. Yes.
Pharmacokinetics of the substance, is it get absorbed or has that been looked at?
I don't know if the company's ever looked at that. We're certainly not administering it orally, and I have no experience with that. In general, this is a biologic agent. It's a monoclonal antibody, and in general, monoclonal antibodies cannot be delivered orally. They require intravenous or subcutaneous delivery. Yes? The question is, if it was successful, would it be available? Could it be available in Europe before the U.S.? And that's certainly possible. It's being developed in the U.S., in Europe, and in Japan, at least, maybe other regulatory agencies. And so the European Medicines Agency will make their own assessment of the study results, separate from the U.S. Food and Drug Administration assessment.
When you say monoclonal, we don't mean human biologics as in blood derivatives? Monoclonal as manufactured?
The question is whether the drug is a human-derived product, and it's not. It's a humanized monoclonal antibody, so it's genetically engineered, but it's not derived from any human blood products. Yes.
What would happen if somebody that was in the Tour de France, in which case there's somebody that had normal muscle development, nothing serious?
Right. The effect. What's the effect of this drug on a Tour de France cyclist? And I don't know. We haven't had any in our study. I don't know what it does. The predicted effect is certainly that this can build muscle in healthy individuals. I think what we accomplished in the study was a more important question is whether it can build muscle in people with IBM. And that's what we learned, and that's what's important, I think, from that study.
Does this antibody have affinity to other proteins? Have you looked at that?
Yeah, so the antibody has affinity to at least two proteins, two different receptors that are related. One is called the activin receptor type 2B, and the other is the activin receptor type 2A. So it does have high affinity to both of those receptors. They have similar functions on muscle, though not exactly the same. And I don't know what studies that Novartis has done regarding affinity to other molecules.
From a cost standpoint, if it's approved, is it cost effective to the patient as far as affording that drug?
The question is about the cost effectiveness of this drug if it got approved. Again, it's a bunch of hypotheticals that I have no expertise in. I could certainly say in general, companies are acutely aware of how much they can get for their products and spend quite a lot of time doing market research and understanding what the market is before they invest $200 million in a drug trial, for example. So it will work out one way or the other. You're not going to price a drug in a way that insurance companies wouldn't cover it if it's FDA approved. Yes. Yeah, the question is whether this drug candidate works on the same mechanism as the follistatin gene therapy, and it's a very similar mechanism. They're not exact. There are some subtle differences between the two, but it essentially converges on the same pathway.
Does the myostatin, is this a deficiency or is it hyperactive? And does it relate to the etiology of IBM?
Yeah, I don't know whether there's a deficiency or excess of myostatin in here. I do know there are technical details of the experiments that I did, but they're in a signaling pathway, so they don't involve measurements of these ligands, myostatin, GDF11, or activin. They involved measurement of downstream events that occur after the receptor is activated, and those findings were relatively specific for IBM amongst muscle diseases. That was my rationale for this study. Is not that we all know that myostatin controls muscle growth and let's try and affect that in some generic way. My rationale for this was that there's something specific about IBM muscle compared to many other muscle diseases that indicates potential activation of this pathway. So let's come in and target this pathway. That was my rationale for asking Novartis to do this study. Yes?
These studies obviously give everybody in this room hope. Are there any other studies that are on the horizon in the next couple of years that you're aware of?
Yeah, I know that other companies are interested in IBM. I don't know, a couple of things change very quickly now, so I wouldn't say, not over the next couple of years. There's nothing I'm aware of that I think is going to happen over the next 6 months, for example. But I know that there are other companies who are very excited about coming into IBM. I think the nice thing about what Novartis has done here is the way this industry works, of course, it's very competitive, and people are always looking at what everyone else is doing, as we all are in our lives, and seeing, Novartis is interested in IBM. There must be something to that. There must be some strategic reason for that, or some reason that if they're interested in it, maybe we should be too. So I think this is pushing other companies to think quite a bit about coming into IBM as a very attractive place for drugs that might make sense. I'm very pleased to see that. I think there are drugs that might make sense out there, and to see companies discover IBM as a very good disease to try their drugs in, their promising drugs, which I think it is. I've thought for many years it is. It's very nice to see that starting to happen now. question is about whether there's someone else who's doing similar tests. I don't think so. To do clinical trials like this, one has to publicize them. They have to be on a database like clinicaltrials.gov. They can't be done in secret. Not in this country, at least. I think Europe is pretty similar, but I don't know. The question is, what about other countries? I have no particular reason to think that somebody in some quiet country somewhere is developing and testing a trial for IBM, and it's a secret from everybody else. I can't see why they would do that. Novartis is the company that produces this drug, BYM-338, and sponsored the trial, which means they paid for it, did most of the organization for the trial, and is certainly sponsoring the next trial. The question is what my advice is if you don't live near a site and want to get into the trial. And I don't have great answer for that. I mean, it's not something I control. If it was my doing, I would enroll every single person who wanted to at my site. So I don't set these rules or control that at all. Novartis has a 188 phone number on the clinicaltrials.gov site, and they're the source of information. Again, my own sense of what's going to happen out there is that there's lots of sites and very few patients at each one, and it's probably just going to come from patients who have been seen at that site for quite a while and live close by, so there's no issues about traveling, and that it's probably not productive to be thinking that you're going to be getting on an airplane and flying someplace for a year and being involved in a site. That being said, I don't want to, if you want to pursue that, all the better. You're welcome. Well, I don't know what their list of identified ones are. The ones on the website are certainly not a complete list of sites that are being pursued right now. And nothing is really a site until a contract has been signed by the institution and Novartis, and institutional review board approval has been taken. So there's a lot of logistics that go in before someplace is truly a site. Question is, how far can a muscle degrade before it comes back? Before it can't come back, yes. I don't know the answer to that. That's the honest answer. Yes?
I heard something yesterday about satellite muscle cells from Dr. Maillard from London that were capable of regenerating muscle. And it wasn't a situation where you're born with all of the fibers you're ever going to have. And that would this be helpful for only those satellite muscle cells, or it certainly wouldn't work on the ones that are already degraded? And there's the ones that you start with that are still there.
The question has to do with muscle regeneration in satellite cells. It's a technical question. Satellite cells contribute to the nuclei of myotubes, and certainly one is fully capable of making new myotubes or enlarging existing myotubes throughout most of one's life, if not one's entire life. And so there's no theoretical limit other than potentially loss of satellite cells, but it's not clear that people couldn't make new satellite cells from earlier stem cells in muscle. I'm not an expert in muscle regeneration, and those are theoretical concerns here. I think the main thing that matters are the practical concerns and what actually happens in the next trial to people who get this drug for a year, and whether they continue to grow muscle throughout that period of time, or not. And so I'm aware of the theoretical concerns here about this drug and about satellite cells, but I don't have any data to speak more to it. Yes.
Based on what you said earlier, it sounds like this study is, if it's successful, the drug would reach the markedly available evidence sooner than would be the case with the Ohio State study, or is that correct?
Boy, I can't speak to the regulatory issues that Ohio is facing right now, honestly. I don't know what their timelines are and what their requirements. That's a very different program. That's a gene transfer program using a virus-mediated approach. It's very different than administering a organic molecule like this biologic agent here. And I don't know what the regulatory steps are for them. And that study does not involve a placebo. This next trial it will be the second trial. It's already started. It's the second trial with BYM-338 in which there's a placebo arm. And ultimately, a placebo arm is crucial for determining effectiveness of something, because you need to compare the treated people with the untreated people and see if there's a difference. So
So that would suggest that the BYM-338 would probably be included.
that would be my guess if it was effective. But again, I don't have any of the details as to how that program is coming along, and what their discussions have been with FDA over their timelines. Yes.
There was muscle growth, muscle improvement. Measured over time, did that muscle growth then tail off or deteriorate? Did it remain stable?
Yeah, I think I'll leave that. The question is about what happened to those 14 patients over time, over a 24-week period. I think I'll just not answer that one, because I want to make sure that the publication of this is not jeopardized in any way by discussing results too far ahead of time, which can sometimes happen. So I know it's a legitimate concern, but the main point of the study was just to see if this thing would build, a single dose would build muscle. So, okay, I think that's all the questions. Thank you very much for your time.